Welcome to Two Baptists and That Amish Chick, a podcast brought to you by the Butter Churn Girls. I'm Leslie.
And I'm Bethany.
And I'm Berlin. Join us for candid conversations about organized religion, the good, the bad, the ugly, and how we broke free from it while holding on to our faith in God.
In these candid conversations, you can expect to laugh, to relate, occasionally cry, and definitely hear a few cuss words.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and follow at the Butter Churn Girls on all socials. Now for this week's episode.
Hey, welcome back, guys. Today we are actually going to talk about Reconstruction because we have hit deconstruction. We kind of touched on it last time, but we don't want to leave you hanging, right?
Yeah.
So we're realizing all three of us have such very different stories when it comes to our Reconstruction that we want to be able to share that. So when we say like, hey, you have permission to go ask the questions, to experience, to like go on this journey, like we've been on very different journeys,
right. Yeah.
That has eventually led us here together. But it's just kind of all looked very different.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And we didn't even all just really quick, like we didn't, or at least I didn't always have a community of people to hang out with when I first started, like the Reconstruction. Like I didn't have y'all, and the community I had wasn't even really a community. Like now looking back, sometimes you don't know what you didn't have until you have it, and you're like, oh, that really wasn't friends.
That's
you know,
true.
So yeah, that was my. Just wanted to say that, like for me, that's what happened, and it seems from what I've heard from you guys that you didn't really have anybody either when you were.
I think sometimes God does need to seclude you and get you alone in order to dive into those things, because you've grown up in a world and a culture where you had influence. Like obviously our parents influence us, or whoever raised you influenced you. For some people it's their grandparents or someone else. And it's always been like a lot of times in religion, it's people there telling you what to believe. So sometimes I feel like God has to actually like pull you back a little bit and like cocoon you in and be like, it's us, because you're so used to hearing other people tell you, and people will come in and go, watch out, be careful, make sure you're not deceived, make sure you're this, make sure you're that. So he's like, I gotta pull you back because some of these people are too scared that I can't talk to you properly and you can't hear me. That I didn't make you capable to hear me. That I was just gonna talk, but make it so that you couldn't hear me. And so I think sometimes God has to pull, I'm like rabbit trail if I keep going, but like, I think God sometimes has to pull us back into that place where he's like, we got to get alone. And I don't mean like, hey, let's go to prayer closet for 15 minutes. I mean, like sometimes he actually pulls us away from people for a long period of time. Like that was my experience.
Y'all need to see Leslie's face now.
But no, for real, like the whole war room thing has just always, like, you can tell I'm like not gifted to be an intercessor because I'm just like, oh, like I can't. I don't know.
Like the Lord didn't hear me the first time.
Yeah.
He knows what I'm saying.
Like I have to travail about everything.
And I don't think that intercession is what we've
exactly.
Been taught,
It's exactly. Like, it's not. And that's one of those things we found on our Reconstruction journey.
Right.
Like I always thought it was like having to be face down in the carpet, like wailing and causing a scene for things to happen.
And you have to do it for like 12 hours a day, and you have to, you know.
Ugh, gag me. I have so many better things I could do.
Right. And now knowing intercessors who are like healthy and who have a healthier view on it, right? Who have probably gone through deconstruction themselves of what intercession looks like. Now I'm like, oh, okay, I can see how that plays a role in, you know, being a Christian or, you know, being in the kingdom. Like, I'm like, okay, that makes more sense. Of that
relationship.
Right. It makes more sense to me than, you know, I think the whole wailing and crying and snotting your face out on a carpet is more of how you believe God to be and how much he can actually hear you than what he's doing. Like that's your own belief.
That you've got to beg God in order to do it. And finally be like, okay, you're my child that I love. I guess I'll help you.
Sorry, I was on vacation and I couldn't hear you, but I'm back now. What do you want?
Yeah. So
that's awful.
Yeah. Sorry, that sounded snotty the way I said it. Yeah. But who wants to
start off?
Yeah.
I can go. So my Reconstruction, I was actually thinking about it just before we started, like, what did it actually look like? And it looked a lot, because performance was so like drilled into me. I mean, like that was the number one thing that everything else was built on. And so for, if you wanted even anything to do with God, you had to work your way into it, no matter what it was. It was very much a toil, like work hard, do the right thing. If you mess up, you go back to square one. Like there was no,
So there was no grace in that.
No, not really.
Gospel.
I mean, they would say grace, but they didn't
But it
understand
what
it was.
Wasn't actually grace.
Yeah, no, it was Amish grace.
Can we start using that as a term?
No,
it's Amish grace.
grace.
I'll give you Amish grace.
Yeah, which is basically none. You get nothing. So for me, I had to really you can leave something and deconstruct, quote unquote, and you can do it physically, but sometimes the things that are inside of you that were taught, like mindset and belief systems, take longer to deconstruct than just the initial leaving physically, making those physical changes. And those physical changes will bring up things on the inside that you're like, oh, wow, yeah, I am not where I thought I was. Very humbling. But like, for me, the reconstruction was when I realized that my deconstruction took a while, and I mean, not just leaving physically, I mean, also like going through the inside, realizing I still think I have to perform.
Yeah.
I still think I have to do things for God. Like,
I think I probably still have pieces of that I still need to break off.
Right.
I think we're always going to find those little areas, right?
Yeah.
And I think some of the things are just there out of habit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until we're faced with it, then we go, oh, wait, that's not how I believe. That's not how I want to move forward.
It's just a routine I've created.
Yeah. And my reconstruction looked like I thought I was reconstructing, but I was just creating the same thing that I came out of. Like the community I was around was very much, if you don't think the same way I do, or you don't, then we're not friends, or we can't hang out. Well, what did I just come from? The very same thing. And so my reconstruction didn't really start until about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. So, I left when I was 21, and the reconstruction happened when I was 27. So that was a whole period of just lots of thinking I was reconstructing, but I was making things in the image of what I had left, and realizing like, oh shoot, I'm doing that again. Okay, let me not do that. Right. And then it was a lot of trial and error in my reconstruction, so to speak, because I was figuring out what it looked like what do I actually believe? And I didn't know. And I was scared kind of to ask myself that question, because I was like, I don't really know. I know less than I did when I was in it, and I probably knew way less then, but I just thought I knew because I had all these beliefs that propped up the house, and so my reconstruction really began when I realized fully that who God is and who Jesus is. And realizing who they are, their true identity, helped me realize how much I don't know about myself, my identity, and what I actually believe. And because I had finally learned who they are, it gave me the safe place to not know.
Can we define identity too? Because I think especially in today's culture, that can mean a whole bunch of different things to different people. So identity, what we're meaning by that is kind of the thing we look at is what are the words God said? What is the purpose kind of God put behind me when he created me? When he spoke me and I was created in the womb, what was that was put behind it? Right. And so we've all kind of gone through our own journey of asking God and having conversations to understand what that means for us. But each person has an identity that God's this is who I made you to be on this earth. I have all these pieces I need, and you are a piece of identity that's needed here. So this has nothing to do with your gender or how you want to title yourself or choose to title yourself or how you feel in that area that you want to be and spoke to, things like that. It's about the best way to probably describe it is what is your core purpose, right? Which your core purpose is meaning the way you live out everything you do for your whole life. You would act that way as a child when you're in your fullest self. You would act that way as an adult at any point, because of who you are. And that's a whole other topic we would go into in like a whole other episode.
I definitely think that's
Right.
something we need to address.
Yeah,
At some point.
Yeah.
but in your identity, like that is like what words did God say when he made you? Like not
Right.
just Bethany, but he's like, here's Bethany, and this is what is in her that the world needs that she's gonna distribute.
Like those core, I'm
Mhm.
glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Like those core things that were put in you of who you are before the world got a hold of you and tried to tell you who you are. Right.
I love that quote so much.
And I do too. I'm like, who were you before the world got a hold of you
Yeah.
and told you who you are?
Mhm.
Because that has happened to probably every single one of us. And identity isn't a label. Your identity is so much bigger than a label. Like you are so complex and multifaceted. It does not, like, putting a label on it is limiting your identity. It's really like, and what I mean by label is like, I prefer to be female or male or non-binary or whatever you want. Like you're limiting yourself when you do that. And so that's like when I figured out who God's identity, who he is, who God is, and he's not at all who I was taught to believe he is. When I fully understood that and was like, oh my gosh, that's the truth. That's when I could start reconstructing, because it gave me that safe place of like, I now have one thing in my life that I now have figured out to be true, that has shown itself to be in its pure form and essence of what, it is, God. Now I have that to lean back into and to like allow I'm sitting in a chair and I can just like lean back on the backrest like that. That was my first start of reconstruction. Is like, oh, okay, I can depend on this with my reconstruction. I can depend on him to be the same consistent thing every single day of my life. He won't change because this is who he is, which means now I have a stabilizer in my life to start reconstructing everything else in my life, and to really be like, I don't know, like in the reconstruction process, be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I believe about that, but let me figure that out.
It's arrogant to think that we know everything about God anyways.
Right.
Like that's something that religion does. So often it's like, we know this for sure about God. No, you don't. No, you don't. Like you kind of interpreted that from the scripture in the English translation. Like, no, you don't. Like you don't.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know all of God. So
it's true.
There's so much more to him.
Yeah. And one last thing that I wanted to say before I pass it on to you guys is I didn't go to church for 8 years of my life. Like I didn't go anymore because I was like, that's not where he is. People try, they say that God's here, but that's actually not. He might, just because you have a church doesn't mean God's in it.
That's right.
Like that's the truth. And I know I probably stepped on some people's toes, but that is yeah, I'll just put a pin in that and keep going. What were you going to say?
I'm like, that's a good point to make, because once you have that moment where you come in and you walk into a church, you walk into an event, an activity, a freaking living room with people who are so in tune with themselves and with God, you can feel the presence of God. And it does not feel like, hey, I made a decision in church today.
Right.
I didn't sign a card.
Yes, you feel something come over you like you have never felt before and you cannot explain. It's like a level of high that you can't.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know what this is, but this
It's
has
awesome.
to be God. And it feels wild and crazy because like you can think that you feel God. Like I thought whole life growing up, I thought God was in church, right?
I thought it felt like
God's here in
emotion.
church. Yes.
Right.
Guilt. To me, it felt like guilt.
Well, true.
It felt like guilt to me.
Wow. Yeah.
Like I must be hearing God, or not even hear God. Like I got convicted by
Must
the
be
sermon to
God
make a
because I'm
decision.
guilt. I feel
Because I feel
guilty.
shame.
Yes. That was Satan.
I love how you just slide that in. That was Satan.
I was just chit chatting with the devil every Sunday. It's fine. Went to the church to do that. They taught me that there. But like, no, like when I felt the very first time, it was at a business conference, guys. The first time I felt the presence of God and I was rocked to the floor. The first time I threw my hands in the air and I was like, I don't know what this is. I'm like, God, at first I was like, I don't know if this is you, but let me just feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And it was not uncomfortable. It was like, what is this? I want more of it. And not just saying I want more of it,
Yeah.
I want more of it. With whatever I've had in the past, I want that shit gone. Like, because
Yeah.
that wasn't you. Like,
Yeah.
that wasn't you. I
Yeah.
just took over. Were you done?
I was just gonna. I love it. It was a great rabbit trail. Like, that was really good. But just the last thing is, I have more closings than
Ryan Pena.
Ryan Pena. I was like, I don't know if I would have put Ryan like on. Sorry, Ryan, if you're listening. But
we'll make that a trailer.
Yeah.
We'll spit that one out.
The mini closings of Bethany. But I realized in my Reconstruction that Reconstruction isn't religious. It doesn't have to look like a certain formula or a certain thing you do. And my
there actually probably
story.
isn't a formula.
No, there really isn't, because
don't think there is one.
There isn't.
Don't look for a system, yo.
Yeah, no, like that's what we're trying to
God
get
likes
away
to flip
from.
the script.
Yes, 100%. And so I would go to church here and there throughout, like, because I was searching to reconstruct, and I would go to a church and I'd be like, nah, still religious. Like, and I refused to settle. As frustrating and annoying and just like, oh my gosh, is there nothing out there? Like, do I have, and I would ask God, like, okay, am I just being like a little, pain in the ass here? Or like, do I just need to settle somewhere? Just like, take the cons with the pros here of this church and just, be a light here, because I really don't want to, but I can if that's what I'm supposed to do. And I never felt from him like, hey, you need to go like, yeah, you need to stay at the certain church. It was more of like, Bethany, give yourself the freedom to be okay with not having your community be a church.
Yeah.
Like, my friends we're not church. Like, they all went to different churches, but we hung out and did fun things because we liked to hang out. Like, that's when I realized, like, oh, this is community. This is actually what it looks like. It doesn't look like going to a church. It looks like hanging out with people.
It's not, we're guilty by association, so we have to spend time together.
Yeah. It's like, for real. Yeah.
For real.
Yeah. It was, for me, it was like, I don't like, might not believe the same thing you do, but we can actually hang out and do community together and life, like life. And I thought back then I was doing life with them, but I really wasn't, because I was still hiding and hurting. And, you can't be fully in community if you don't allow yourself to be seen. And most of us don't feel safe enough to be seen fully. Right. And so, like, we only halfways have a community or some of people we think we have a community.
Right.
And so I would go to church and here and there, and finally when I realized that, like, church isn't where community necessarily always is. Like, my friends aren't don't equal that. I was like, oh, okay, well then I don't have to go to church, because there was still something in the back of my mind, like, I should probably go to church, and then when I realized that was a part of me starting, like, okay, reconstructing, this is kind of what community looks like. Okay, cool. And then like 2.5 years ago, when I found out who God and Jesus and Holy Spirit are, and the Bible is not part of the Trinity, and like all of this crazy stuff, it just catapulted me into reconstruction, like fully reconstructing of like, oh my gosh, like, this is a crazy, I had like done this journey for 6 or 7 years of just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Winging it pretty much until looking back now, I probably wouldn't have been ready for what I was introduced to 2.5 years ago. Like, things come to you when you're ready for them in your reconstruction journey, and trust that they do. Like, I can tell you from experience, they come to you when you're ready and not before. And they're never late, because when I found those things out 2.5 years ago, I was like, well, shoot, where was this 6 years ago? And God was like, well, you've been ready for it. And I was like, oh, no, I wouldn't have been. Thank you. Like, so that was my journey of reconstruction. And the last 2.5 years have been a lot of reconstruction.
It hasn't been 3 or 4 years almost.
Probably, yeah. Time goes by so
it's been like 3 or 4 years.
I know.
Because I knew you were working through things. Yeah. Like, we knew each other then. And we were
Has
going
it
through
actually
those.
been 3 or 4
Yeah,
years?
I think almost 4 years.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Heck, well,
Because I was looking, it wasn't until Facebook memories popped up the other day. And whenever I was just thinking about what we were going to talk about on the podcast and deconstructing and reconstructing and all the things. And Facebook memory popped up and I was like, I've literally been saying it's been like a 2-year journey for at least 3 years. Oops. So apparently it's 5
We
years.
had those couple years that we skipped over where we masked ourselves and we're hiding.
But now it really is 2 years now. But yeah, same. Like I didn't ever know I was deconstructing or reconstructing, right? Like it was not something
That just hit us.
right. Like this language literally, I think in the last several weeks, month,
Yeah.
2 months, something like that, kind of we went, oh, that's what we did.
There's a name for it.
Yeah.
And we're like,
Oh, we're not just hoodlums.
As we hop into this though, Bethany mentioned religion so much. I feel like we should define religion because like, okay, for me growing up in the Baptist church I was in, they always said, we don't have religion, we have a relationship. But there are also a lot of words, just how Bethany said, like grace wasn't really grace. There's a lot of words that when you're a kid, they're like, here's what this means, but it can be something else. Like think of how many, you can take a random food name. We've had this conversation about stuffing versus dressing.
Yes.
Like it's completely different things and different, like it's the same thing, but different meanings to different people. Like, like
different
things.
words for the same thing.
And so, or it's people using the same word and they have a completely different definition. And so that happened with grace. And I think that's the thing with religion too, because for me, it was always, it's not religion, it's relationship. But now I look back and I'm like, what we had was religion. If I had to wear a certain skirt, or I wasn't connecting with God, or I was going against God, that's religion. If I had to look a certain way, if I had to act a certain way, if I had to do these certain things, that is religion. So how would you guys define like really quickly what religion is? So then people know actually what they're breaking away from, so they can know what they can go into.
It looks like a set of rules or a set of standards or a guideline, right? Like we keep saying like, hey, we don't want to say like, this is the exact plan, right? When it comes to deconstructing or reconstructing. It looks like freedom. That's what relationship looks like. It looks like freedom because religion is so
and the truth will
structured.
set you free.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Yeah. And the best way, the best way I like to say it, or I've heard, is religion is man's way to God. Like religion is man's way to work himself into good standing with God. So you take that and you apply it to anything you do in life. Am I doing this so that God will think better of me? Am I doing this so that I can actually have a relationship with him? Am I doing this so that I think he'll love me more? Any of those things are religious because they're forcing you man's way to God. Like God already made a way. You can stop doing that. Like he did it because he loves us. And because like, hey, you're my kids. I'm going to like give my life for you. And we're like, oh no, that's not good enough. We got to work our way into it. Like for real?
Yeah.
That's hasn't like what a like way to mock him and be like, oh, you weren't good enough. And so
It's like, it's an arrogance on our part.
yeah. And most of us don't even know it.
Enough. And so I've got to do these. If I do these things, then you got me.
Yeah.
It's very, your death wasn't good enough.
It's very pride. Like there's a lot of pride in religion too. Like I'm really good because I did all these things. And
That's what I was going to say is like a piece of it for me, I would say, if you know that it's a religious thing, is if you do something, you feel it's authentic to you, but you're afraid of, will I run into people in the church? What would they think if I showed up looking like that? For us, it was a big thing on the way you dress. If I showed up wearing that, am I going to feel judged? Am I going to feel like I did something wrong? If I say this thing, am I going to feel like I say something wrong? I say the word crap. Is someone going to say I'm a sinner and I'm not looking good for Jesus, or my testimony's been ruined?
Yeah.
That's how you're knowing that that's religion.
Yeah.
That's not a relationship. That is, I am doing these acts to look a certain way, to look apart, to try and make this circle look really, really good. And it's not actually about God. That is how you know you're in religion.
Yeah. The result of religion is shame. Often. If you feel shame.
Say that again.
The result of religion is shame.
That's good.
That's the emotion that you feel when that's one of the emotions.
That's good.
Yeah. And the result of knowing that you're in a relationship is love and freedom. That you don't feel like you have to always watch your back to make sure that, no, somebody's not going to see you, or God's going to beat you over the head, or, you know, fear and shame come from religion. Freedom and love come from God and relationship. I just thought about that as you were talking.
That's good. That's good. All right, should we let Leslie go into hers now?
Yes.
Sure.
Now that I was like, hold on.
But no, we like kind of what we're just talking about is like performance, right? And so that was really what I was kind of stuck in. Like I ran from God for several years. Like you were talking about not going to church. I didn't either. I didn't intend to go and just run from God, but I did because I was like, listen, if he is that scary, if he is as scary as like I am perceiving him to be, how I'm taught that he is, I'm not going to be a part of that. Like, I don't want the relationship with that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I ran for several years, and it wasn't until I was like stuck in a situation and I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. She's like, have you prayed about it? And I went, and it just kind of like smacked me, but it wasn't God condemning me. It was, that's one of the times I'm like, that was the loudest, I think. Well, one of the loudest times I've ever heard Satan talking about, you're going to go to hell. Right. Like that was one of those things. And so as soon as I like moved back, I was overseas when that happened. And as soon as I moved back, like I knew I was going to this church, and it's so, God is so funny. Like I look back and I'm like, oh, you were there the whole time. He's like, okay, you're running. Okay. Like I'm 2 steps ahead and 2 steps behind. Like I'm around you all the time. Right. And so it's really cool to like look back and go, oh, in the middle of my hoodlum days, you were still right there. But one of the biggest things was when I came back and got into church, it was performance based, right? Like, and the church did put an emphasis on like, hey, we want you to come, like, we want you to be here. We want you to volunteer, and we want you to be part of a life group, right? Like they know the importance of community. And I think like there is an importance of involvement, but to the point of like, hey, I love my church and I want to like
I say I'm good at this. I want to do it because I know I'm good at it, and
not out of obligation.
Yeah.
Because what that little bit of, yes, I want to contribute to this community turned into countless hours of like free work that the church was hiring people at other places to do the same thing, but I was doing it for free.
Yeah.
And when it was mentioned, like, hey, like if you're ever like looking for a job opening, like if you ever have a job opening, and they're like, and so it always like made me feel like I was not good enough.
You used almost.
Yeah.
You feel used.
And
I
was.
Used. Yeah.
And so like I finally was like, I'm out. And the weight that lifted off of me, I was like, oh. Whoa. And so I was still at that church for a while. And the thing that kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back essentially was I was, and I know I'm talking a little bit about deconstruction, but there's a point to it. Like I felt like I couldn't leave because of this performance aspect of, you don't want to go church hopping. Just because they say something that you don't agree with doesn't mean you just hop and go to the next church. I agree to a point, but at the same time, if you start disagreeing and seeing red flags and a lot of the stuff you're learning, like it's time to go somewhere else. And so, and that was a big conversation I had with God. I'm like, God, I know you're telling me to go to this other church. And I know like, and then I spent a year there, and then he sent me to another one, and I was there for a year, and he sent me to another one. And I was like, God, I don't want to be this person. And he's like, you don't want to discover more of me in all these places.
Yeah.
And so it was literally like me trying to still perform and like not, I didn't want to fit into that church hopper like label, but that was exactly what God made me do. One, to break it off, but two, like he literally led me to all the places to help me learn.
Yeah.
Right. Those things that I was ready to learn.
Yeah.
Yes. Occasionally it would be a smack in the face, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so offensive. Like I was so offended at so many different turns, but it was like, once I like he kept sending me a security blanket, right? Like, and I keep calling people that, but I'm like, really, he kept like leading people to me that I knew from my past who had been in a similar place, who had already walked part of this journey, right? Because they're all on their own journey, but like our paths intersected again.
Right.
And so we were there together for like little seasons, right? A couple months here and there. And it has been, like that was actually one of the craziest things was my reconstruction looked like church hopping. And like that was not, it looked like running and church hopping. So your reconstruction is not going to look the same, right?
The thing is it probably looks like that to religious people.
Oh, 100%. Well, because it looked like that to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why were you such a religious person?
No, I was trying.
We all were. Come on.
I was trying. Listen, well, and it's funny. We say that, like, I talk about the church hopping, and I'm like, did I not do that my whole dang life, though? I went to Baptist church on Sunday, Catholic school, Methodist after school program. Then, like, in college.
Diverse.
Multicultural.
I was about to say the same thing.
But, like, then going to, like, mega churches, and then even doing home churches in college, and, like, I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
And so it was deconstructing a lot.
Right.
But also, like, I look back and I can find good in every single one of those things, right? And so I think one of the important parts about that reconstruction is you have to let go of those labels of whether it's a church hopper or you're not going enough or you're
or
like,
people saying you're running from God.
Yeah. True.
They don't know. They don't know the path you're on, so they really don't know
that. Yes. Like I lost it, dang it. But like I always lose my train of thought. I'm sorry. But no, I just think it's so important to know just how different a journey can look. And from the religious point of view that like you may come from, which was my case, I looked like I was breaking all the rules. Like I looked like the wild child who was just lost in life. Right. But I was not only finding God, I was finding myself in the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which we're made in God's image. So if we don't know who we are, dang, it makes it real hard.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you have to find out who he is before you can find out who you are.
100%.
And it just makes that finding who you are so much easier because you know like where you come from now. Like you understand the true origin, not the messed up origin that somebody taught you, probably they didn't mean to, they just had a messed up version themselves, they just passed it on. So anyway, what's your story, Berlin? Reconstruction.
So the reconstruction, the cool thing about this is, or what I think is funny, is the place when I really started to reconstruct that I would say like this is the defining moment of me reconstructing was interestingly enough, I had someone on my social media posted this link about, hey, like here's this 3-episode podcast about how Bethel Church is wrong, which I didn't know anything about Bethel, right? Like I knew Bethel music. I didn't know it was a church. I didn't know any of that, right? And it took me into this whole like series of listening to another episode that followed up, like, you listen to podcasts. Some of you guys will start binging us here too. You start binging it, right? And the whole thing honestly was breaking down and talking about how charismatic churches were demonic and evil and all these things.
I mean, it's funny because I've thought that at one point too. Like I've walked in places and I'm like, that is excessive. Like that is just performance. And as I'm like cleaning up the coffee bar. Right? Like, okay.
Not involved in the service at all or what's happening or the Holy Spirit's movement. Yeah. And so that was a big piece that opened my eyes. Actually, right before that was when that experience that happened. I'm like, did I mention that this episode? Maybe it was the previous one.
The business.
The business conference. That was an encounter. That was the first time I encountered God. Because we can go to church where we say God is, we can talk to God, we can hear things about God, but that was the first time I encountered God. And then I followed that up with hearing these episodes of them talking crazy talk about Bethel Church and the experiences. And there was a whole social media post and conversation and tons of people from my world I came from that were like, yeah, this is nuts. Don't listen to them. That worship music's bad. And I listened to it and I was like, I want that. Whatever that is that they're talking so bad about, I want that. And I think it's because I had just had an encounter with God through something very similar. Through being in a room full of people that were
people who know the Bethel people.
Yes.
Yeah. Like-
yes. People who physically actually know those people. And it was my first time being in a room where people were, the whole room was raising their hands in worship, where they were moving around, dancing with flags, yelling in the group, yelling in tongues. And I felt like it was that freedom, right? That first experience of freedom where I was like, every single person in this room, I don't think I had this conscious thought, but my spirit realized everyone in this room is moving in God in a way that feels right to who they were created to be.
Yeah.
Because some people standing there singing a hymn, God wasn't like, and then I want to create these people who stand here and sing hymns. Some of y'all love hymns and that's how you feel like you're worshiping God. Some of you guys really want to dance.
Yeah.
You're in your car and you're like jamming to music, right? You're like, this is not Christian radio, but I love it. And I feel like I'm in my joy zone. That's you encountering God because you're in joy.
You know, Jesus listens to rap music.
Duh. Hello.
Just throwing that out there.
And it's not just Kanye's.
No. Like, they're his kids too.
Yeah.
They
Tell me Tupac's not prophetic.
right? Yeah. Like, tell me that, you know, some of those artists that some Christian people are like, oh my gosh, I'd never listen to them. Did you know that they hear from God too? And they don't know it, but they're being prophetic sometimes. They're singing, like they are putting God out into the world in ways that are so unconventional that we who have forced things into being a conventional way, we don't pick it up.
In a level of freedom that most Christians are scared of.
Yeah.
And honestly, God would love to have somebody
do
it, but sometimes we're so stuck up,
right,
and stuck in our own world, we can't hear him to do what he wants us to do. And so he's going to find somebody that's not Christian to bring what is needed.
He's going to find whoever's willing. Doesn't matter like what they're doing. I just
sorry, we kidnapped.
No,
sorry,
it's good. Hey, I kidnapped too. But yeah, and so it's interesting that, like you guys talked about, it was like this church hopping and moving around and all this. And like for me, it was like this massive, like that was within like a 2-week time frame of those podcasts and that going to that event where there was boom, this massive freaking encounter. And I felt like, I don't want to say I felt like a new person because that seems so cliche, but it was like,
but you did
everything inside of me, like, you know, when you just have something that rocks your world and you're like, feel like you're living in a twilight zone or something. That's what I felt like. And then I realized, like, I just started diving into it, and like that was the first time I just encountered the prophetic and seeing people who didn't know each other in a room and people prophesying over them and them dropping to the floor going, oh my gosh, this is my life. Like I remember specifically someone that was there being prophesied over and her like bawling her eyes out. Well, now she's my best friend. I didn't know her at that point. And so she goes back to that word and I'm like, I remember it, but I didn't know her. And now I know her. I'm like, well, clearly.
Yeah.
And so for me, like that encounter was so massive. And it's what launched me and catapulted me so fast. Like we've talked about this in the last episode on deconstruction about the fact that like you can learn something wrong for many, many years. For me, it was a good 25, 26-ish years, somewhere in there. And then all of a sudden in a few years, like the Lord can be like, boom, let me flip this and show you who I really am. Let me show you how you can hear from me and how you have heard from me. You haven't trusted me. And so that catapulted me into my reconstruction. And I started diving into all kinds of things. I was like, I want to learn about dream interpretation. What is this? Because I've always thought that there was some kind of meaning behind dreams. I want to learn about what this prophetic thing is and understand how that works. I want to learn how to do it, how to know I'm hearing from God and how to encourage people through it. I was like, I want to understand the theology, like what's happening inside of scriptures. I want to understand what is not true and what's not accurate, right? We talked about identity. And for me, truth is a massive, massive, massive piece of my identity. And so finding that truth was so important to me.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah.
To know that I was finding truth and know how to prove to myself that it was truth, right? That it wasn't just another bro in a suit telling me what to wear, or a bro in a hat and t-shirt, whatever. Like that it was truth. And so for me, it felt like this massive burst, right? And like you guys talked about like not going to church for a while in that time frame. I had basically I hate using COVID as time frame, but let's be real. Once COVID hit and like churches closed, I was like, shoot, I don't feel bad not going there now because we're not supposed to go. Like I didn't have like I think I went back once after that, and I was like, I'm out. And during that time frame, like I met with people over Zoom. That's how my community was built. Now I live around people. Like that's why we're here together. We moved to be near people that we knew had deconstructed and that had reconstructed and that we're seeking out. Yeah, that we're seeking out truth, not based off what someone said, but based off from knowing how to find it for themselves. But like I took a couple years where I had one set of friends around me, one couple around my husband and I, and we dove into understanding it. And knowing how to hear God, because when you get secluded and alone like that, you start walking around your backyard, throwing a ball for your dogs, and you're like, "Oh Lord, okay, I hear you." Like, that was dramatic. Okay, but that's how it feels.
Sometimes we have so much noise around us that like we can't. We have a really hard time hearing Him.
It's not that we can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah. It's like right there, and you know, it's interesting because it sounds like were you done? Before I just like hop into
I think the last piece I would just want to say is that in this, when you are doing this, you can still learn from other people, but get really in tune with, first of all, trusting yourself. You can hear God and you can trust yourself. 100%. You are not evil and like you can trust yourself, right? God wants to talk to you. He is talking to you. And if you hear something and it seems like a good thing, it's probably God. And so trust yourself in that, and you can still learn from other people. And even the year before we stopped going to church, I was already deconstructing and reconstructing at the same time. But I would sit in church and go, that piece is wrong, but it's fine. Continue on. Like in my mind, right? Where I'm like, you got that wrong. It's a little bit off, but it's okay. I can eat the meat and spit out the bones. So know that you can still learn from other people. You can't, you don't have to though. But I think it is good to have other voices and stuff and to like start building a community around you, because you can bounce ideas off and get revelations. But so now you can learn from other people, and you don't have to trust, like, be like everything they say is truth. Like ask Holy Spirit, like something feels off about that. Can we like make a note? Let me jot that down. This is what I feel like is a little bit off. Let's talk to God about it later. Let's talk to Holy Spirit about it later. Let's talk to Jesus about it later. Talk to them all separately if you want to about it later. Whatever. But like, you can still learn from people or you cannot learn from people. Like it is literally your journey of reconstruction. So choose to go about it how you may, and maybe you learn from people for a while and then you take a break and you come back and forth. But like, it's your journey. So you can take any of those avenues. It's all about putting those pieces back together in a way that feels right to you or fits your journey, I should say. But it's interesting because like, it sounds like our reconstruction really got catapulted when we had like an encounter. An encounter in its simplest term, like the meaning of that word is to run into. And it sounds like we all ran into God, kind of like, oh, this is who you are. Oh, okay. And it was like, cool.
And like, you know, it doesn't have to be a violent thing, but like,
mine kind of felt that way. Like a good violence, right? Violent love is what it felt like.
Mine was like violent freedom. Like, holy crap, what in the world? Like, this is actually like, it was such a running into freedom that it just like, I was like, what the heck, let's go, you know, like, let's reconstruct. Okay, what else? Because then that ignites a hunger to reconstruct. Like, what else can I learn? What else? Like, what else can I put back together that's actually truth? And do you have any other thoughts, Leslie?
I don't think so. I was like, you were like, it's like violent love, and you're like, it's like violent freedom. And I was like, what would I call
Who was violent about mine?
I know, like, what is the violence?
Because like it says the kingdom, violent men take it by force about the kingdom. And it doesn't mean violent as, you know, we've labeled the word violent as like awful, bad, evil, but it can be violent peace. It can be violent joy. It can be violent freedom. Like, and I'm like that kind that just shakes you like, oh my, like you fight for it, right? Or you encounter it and then you keep it and you, anyway.
There's one little more thing I want to add here as we wrap it up too, is that in your encounters, like mine was like a violent love coming in, but there was also for me actually at the same thing, like I said, it was a business conference I was at, where it was people of faith, where I had a piece of my encounter was literally, been going through some hard things. I had been a foster parent the previous year, had a lot of like guilt and shame on me because I parented 12 kids. And if you've had mom shame, you know, that's a thing. Like I know Leslie's nanny a lot of kids. I'm sure she's dealt with that at times too. Like, man, why did I lose my temper about things? Like I had those things. I had a miscarriage the year before that I was very angry at God about. Like that could be a whole episode in of itself of working through that anger. But in the midst of that encounter, like, yes, there was violent love, but you can also have an encounter that seems, I don't want to say dark or scary, but I'll just give an example of what happened to me. Actually, there during worship, there was a song that was sung. I had never heard the song before, and I just closed my eyes in worship, right? And I literally saw these demons coming at my sides, right? Like these tall, lanky, skinny, dark beings, right? And there was dozens of them either coming at me from either side, reaching out, grasping and pulling at me. I'm just standing with my eyes closed, and this is what I'm experiencing. And I'm like frozen, right? Because this is like, that's kind of like, it's a scary thing, right? And I just heard God go, step forward. And so I literally physically took a step forward and I saw my body move forward, right? This is like in my imagination, right? God uses your imagination. Like I physically did step forward, but I'm seeing these demons in my imagination. And I take this physical step forward, and all of a sudden, since there's a dozen demons on either side of me, they don't move forward with me. They come at each other instead. And it's like I saw a cage lift up from around me and it came back down and slammed on top of them. And it was like, it was done. Wow. It broke things away and off from me. It was like this freedom that came. So sometimes these encounters that you're going to have, these situations, you don't need to be like, oh no, I'm walking with the devil. I saw a scary thing. No, God might be here to show you, be like, there's been this thing that's been haunting you. And maybe this thing is like performance in your church. It could literally be that, right? And breaking those things away where it could feel where you're like, this seems like a dark thing. That does not mean you're in a location where you're encountering Satan worshipers. That may be like, God's like, I'm here and I'm ready to break this sucker off of you. You didn't even know it was there. It's time.
Encounter is encountering him in whatever way, whether he's there to teach you something or set you free from something. Usually it's a combination of both. And it doesn't look the same, you know. So
so we encourage you guys to just go on your journey. Listen, you can listen to, like I said, listen to different voices, right? Hear different people, ask Holy Spirit to guide you and lead you. Trust yourself in that process, that you can hear from God, and that he's just going to lead you to the direction that you need to go. And if you have questions, like ask us questions. Obviously it's so that there's not a step-by-step,
right?
It's so different for every single person. You could hop on social media. I know I can hop on TikTok and watch deconstruction, and there's 10 million bazillion different stories of how people are doing it. Just the big thing is you want to deconstruct and you want to reconstruct by going, God, what do you actually look like? Who are you for real? Who are you for real? And let your voice come in. That is the real you. And just like ask him to just hide the things that aren't him, right? Like don't let those voices come, like even if it's being said to me, let it go like in one ear and out the other, and not be a part of what comes in as in thoughts that are set in my mind and belief systems that are set in. So we just encourage you guys to do that reconstructing.
Like ask him for a hunger of the truth, because he is the truth, and when you have a hunger for it, you can't not find it. Hunger will drive you to the things that feed you. So that's my last comment.
I don't know that I have anything else.
Okay.
But thank you guys for joining this episode. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye guys.
Later.